Most people see police lights and feel their stomach drop. For me, it was different. I looked at the officer in my mirror and realized he had no idea he was about to ruin his own career. He saw a black woman in a luxury SUV and assumed I was a target. He didn't see the gavel in my trunk or the law degree on my wall. He thought this was a routine shakedown. He was dead wrong. The clock on my dashboard flickered to 11:42 p.m. as I rolled out of the courthouse parking garage. It had been a grueling 12-hour day of back-to-back hearings, soul-crushing testimony, and the heavy weight of the black robe still feeling like it was resting on my shoulders. I just wanted to get home, kick off my heels, and forget that the world could be a dark place. I merged onto the I-95, the hum of my SUV providing a rare moment of peace. The highway was mostly empty, just a few long-haul truckers and the occasional late-shift worker dragging themselves toward the suburbs. I was cruising at exactly 65 miles per hour. I am a judge. I live by the rules. I don't speed, I don't roll through stop signs, and I certainly don't give anyone a reason to look twice. But about 4 miles into my commute, I saw them. 2 white orbs in my rearview mirror that didn't belong. They were hovering exactly 2 car lengths behind me, not passing, just lingering. I shifted to the middle lane to let them by. They shifted with me. I moved to the slow lane, my heart beginning a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. They moved again. That is when the predator-prey instinct kicked in. I wasn't just a driver anymore. I was being tracked. Through the glare of their high beams, I caught the silhouette of the light bar on the roof. State Patrol. My mind immediately went into legal overdrive. I mentally checked my mirrors, my lights, my registration. Everything was perfect. My vehicle was a clean, late-model luxury SUV, the kind of car that usually grants you a pass in the suburbs but acts like a neon sign in the wrong parts of town. I knew exactly what was happening. This was the pretext. They weren't looking for a criminal. They were looking for a profile. I gripped the steering wheel at 10:02, my knuckles turning white. I kept my eyes straight ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me look nervous. I knew the statistics better than the man behind those headlights. I had sentenced men for less than what was about to happen. I had listened to officers testify about reasonable suspicion while knowing they were layering lies over bias. Now, I was the one in the crosshairs. The cruiser suddenly accelerated, pulling up alongside my driver's side window. For a few terrifying seconds, we were matched in speed, flying down the asphalt at 60 miles per hour side by side. I didn't turn my head, but I could feel his eyes boring into the side of my face through the tinted glass. He was trying to see who was behind the wheel. He was looking for a reason to escalate. He saw my braids, he saw the color of my skin, and I saw his blinker flash. He dropped back behind me instantly. Then came the lights, that strobing red and blue rhythm that turns the world into a nightmare. It wasn't just a signal to pull over, it was an opening move in a game he thought he had already won. I slowed down, looking for a well-lit shoulder. I wasn't going to stop in the dark. I wanted cameras. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the light. As I rolled to a stop under the buzzing glow of a highway street lamp, I felt a strange shift in my spirit. The exhaustion from the courthouse vanished. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He thought he was pulling over a victim. He thought he was about to exert his authority over someone who would tremble and beg. He had no idea that he had just pulled over the one person in this county who could hold him truly accountable. The shadow on the highway had caught its prey, but the prey was about to become the hunter. I watched him in my side mirror as he stepped out of his cruiser. He didn't just walk, he marched. It was that heavy-booted, wide-stanced gait of a man who had been taught that the street was his kingdom and every driver was a subject. I kept my hands exactly where he could see them, flat on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. In the legal world, we call this de-escalation, but in the real world, it felt like a silent prayer. I rolled my window down just 4 inches, enough to speak, but not enough for him to reach inside. The night air was cold, but the heat coming off his ego was palpable. He didn't lead with a good evening. He didn't even ask for my name. The first thing that hit me was the glare of his high-intensity flashlight, aimed directly at my eyes to disorient me. It is a classic tactical move designed to strip away your dignity and your vision at the same time. I squinted, refusing to look away. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," he barked. His voice had that jagged, rehearsed edge to it, like he was reading from a script he had used 1,000 times on people he assumed wouldn't fight back. I waited a beat. Silence is a powerful tool in a courtroom, and it is even more powerful on a dark shoulder of the I-95. "Officer," I said, my voice steady and low, "could you please tell me the reason for the stop before I reach for my documents?" I knew the law. I knew he needed a specific, articulable suspicion to pull me over. I wasn't being difficult. I was being a citizen. But to a man like him, a black woman asking for the law is the ultimate act of defiance. He leaned in closer, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "I told you to give me your paperwork, not give me a hard time. You were swerving." It was a lie, a blatant, lazy lie. I had been driving like I was taking a license exam. I told him as much, calmly pointing out that my vehicle was equipped with a lane assist camera system that records every drift. His jaw tightened. He didn't like being fact-checked. He shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively toward the heavy utility belt at his waist. "Step out of the car," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that contradicted my calm exterior. I knew exactly where this was going. He wanted me out in the open, away from the protection of my vehicle, where he could control the physical space. He wanted to look down on me. He wanted to see if I would crumble under the pressure of his shadow. I asked him again, "Officer, on what grounds are you ordering me out of my vehicle? I have committed no traffic infraction, and I am not a threat to your safety." He didn't answer with words. He reached out and gripped the door handle, trying to jerk it open. Thank God I had the foresight to keep the doors locked. The click of the handle hitting the lock mechanism echoed in the quiet night like a gunshot. The mask of professionalism finally slipped. He leaned his face right up against the glass, his breath fogging the window. "You think you're smart? You think because you're driving a fancy car you don't have to follow orders? Get out of the car now, or I will break this window and pull you out." This was the power trip in its purest form. It wasn't about public safety. It wasn't about the law. It was about a man with a badge who couldn't handle the fact that I wasn't afraid of him. I looked him dead in the eye. I could see the reflection of my own calm face in his sunglasses. I realized in that moment that he wasn't just an officer. He was a symptom of a much larger disease. He saw me as a random driver, a statistic he could bully into submission. He had no idea that every word he spoke was being recorded by my dashcam and burned into the memory of a woman who spent her days deciding the fate of people just like him. I took a deep breath, reached down and unbuckled my seatbelt. The click sounded final. I knew that once I stepped out of that car, the dynamic would change forever. He thought he was winning. He thought he had successfully intimidated another victim. As I reached for the door latch, I felt a strange sense of pity for him. He was playing a game he didn't realize was rigged against him from the start. I wasn't just stepping out of a car, I was stepping into his professional grave. The door creaked open, and the humidity of the night air rushed in, mixing with the sharp, metallic scent of the highway and the heavy, oppressive tension radiating from the officer. I stepped out slowly, my heels clicking against the rough asphalt of the shoulder. I stood my ground, smoothing out my blazer, refusing to hunch my shoulders or look at the ground. I am 5'6", but in that moment, with the weight of my ancestors and my profession behind me, I felt 10 feet tall. He didn't give me an inch of personal space. He stepped into my bubble immediately, his chest nearly touching mine, a classic intimidation tactic designed to make a suspect feel small and claustrophobic. I didn't flinch. I looked up at him, my expression a mask of stone. "Step back, officer," I said. It wasn't a plea. It was a directive. "You have no reason to be in my physical space. I am out of the vehicle as you requested. Now state your business or let me go." He let out a short, dry laugh, the kind of sound a bully makes when they think they've found a toy that talks back. "Business? My business is keeping these streets clean from people like you who think they're above the law. You've been combative since I pulled you over. That gives me every right to ensure you aren't carrying anything that could be a threat to my safety." I knew what was coming next. The Terry stop. The legalized shakedown. He reached out to grab my arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of my expensive suit. I pulled back instinctively. "Do not touch me," I warned. "I am telling you now, for the record and for your dashcam, that I do not consent to any physical contact or search of my person or my property." He didn't care about consent. He didn't care about the Fourth Amendment. In his mind, those were just words on a page that didn't apply to the man with the gun. "I smell marijuana," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "It is the oldest trick in the book, the magic scent that justifies every illegal search in the country. I don't smoke. I don't even like the smell of heavy perfume. My car smelled like leather and the latte I had finished 3 hours ago." "You don't smell anything but your own desperation to find a crime where there isn't one," I replied. My heart was racing now, not out of fear, but out of a pure, cold fury. I watched as his hand moved toward his belt. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster. The sound of that plastic snap was like a thunderclap in the silence of the highway. He was escalating this from a traffic stop to a life-or-death confrontation over a lie he had invented 60 seconds ago. "Turn around and put your hands on the hood," he barked. He was vibrating with a strange kind of energy, a mix of adrenaline and the need to break me. He wanted to see me in handcuffs. He wanted to see me face down on the gritty pavement. He wanted to prove that no matter how nice my car was or how well I spoke, he was still the master of my fate in the dark. I realized then that if I didn't change the game right now, this could end in a way that didn't involve a courtroom. I saw the way his eyes darted to my hands, looking for any movement he could call reaching. I saw the way he shifted his weight, preparing to tackle me. This wasn't about a lane change anymore. This was a man who had lost his way, using his badge as a shield for his own insecurities. I reached for my blazer pocket. His hand flew to his weapon. "Don't move!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a sudden, panicked intensity. "Hands where I can see them. Hands up." I froze. I kept my palms flat and open, level with my shoulders. I looked him dead in the eye, past the sunglasses and the ego, straight into the man behind the badge. "Officer," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than his shout. In my pocket is a leather case. Inside that case is the reason why you are about to lose everything you've worked for. I'm going to reach for it very slowly. And when I do, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that you chose this. The air between us felt electric, thick with the possibility of a mistake that couldn't be undone. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving under his Kevlar vest. He was on the edge, and I was the only one who knew how deep the drop was. I began to move my hand inch by inch toward the pocket where my ID was tucked away. This was the most dangerous moment of my life, and I was betting it all on the one thing I had spent my life defending: the truth. The tension on that highway shoulder was so thick you could have sliced it with a subpoena. I could feel the grit of the asphalt beneath my heels and the oppressive heat of the cruiser's engine idling nearby. The officer's hand was still hovering over his holster, his fingers twitching. He was a man on the edge of a terrible mistake, and I was the only one with the power to stop him or let him fall. I moved my hand toward my inner blazer pocket with the slow, deliberate grace of a surgeon. Every micro-inch was a gamble. I knew that if I moved too fast, his training, or his fear, would take over, and I'd be another hashtag by morning. I kept my eyes locked on his, a silent command for him to stay still. I wasn't just a driver anymore. I was the presiding authority in a courtroom that consisted of 2 people and a dashcam. Slowly, he hissed, his voice trembling with a cocktail of adrenaline and misplaced authority. Whatever it is, you pull it out with 2 fingers. If I see anything else, you're hitting the ground. I didn't blink. I reached into the silk lining of my jacket and felt the cool, embossed leather of my credential case. It felt heavier than usual. It felt like a shield. I pinched the corner of the case and pulled it out, inch by agonizing inch, until the gold seal of the state was visible in the harsh, flickering light of his own flashlight. I didn't hand it to him. I flipped it open with a snap that sounded like a gavel hitting a mahogany bench. There it was. My name, my photograph, and the words that changed the atmosphere of the entire state of Georgia. District Court Judge. The beam of his flashlight hit the gold badge inside the leather flap, and for a second the light reflected back into his eyes, blinding him. He squinted, leaning forward, his ego still trying to process what he was seeing. He expected a fake ID. He expected a library card. He expected a bluff. But as his eyes adjusted and he read the title, as he saw the official seal that he himself was sworn to protect, the air seemed to get sucked out of the space between us. The transition was physical. His shoulders, which had been puffed out like a defensive cobra, suddenly slumped. The hand that had been resting on his weapon dropped to his side as if the holster had turned into lead. His jaw, which had been set in a hard, aggressive line, literally hung open. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It was the sound of a man realizing he had just spent 20 minutes harassing the woman who could overturn his arrests, sign his warrants, and ruin his credibility with a single footnote in an opinion. "I didn't realize," he stammered. The tough guy growl was gone, replaced by a high-pitched, frantic stutter that made him sound like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Your Honor, I was just—" The car matched a description, and with the window tint I couldn't see. "You couldn't see a human being," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his excuses like a hot blade. "You saw a car you didn't think belonged here, and you saw a face you thought you could break. You didn't realize you were talking to someone who knows exactly how many laws you just shattered on this highway. I didn't put the ID away. I held it right in his line of sight, making him look at it. I wanted him to see the state seal. I wanted him to understand that the power he thought he had was alone, and I was the one who checked the balance. He started to back up, a frantic, awkward shuffle. He was trying to figure out how to unpull me over. He was looking for an exit strategy that didn't involve a disciplinary hearing. "I apologize, Your Honor," he said, his face now a ghostly shade of pale. "There's been a massive misunderstanding. You're free to go. Please, I'll get out of your way." "Free to go?" I asked, a cold smile spreading across my face. "Officer, we haven't even started. You told me you smelled marijuana. You told me I was swerving. You told me I was being combative. Are you telling me now that you lied to a judge?" He froze. He was caught in a legal pincer move. If he stood by his lies, he was accusing a judge of a crime. If he took them back, he was admitting to filing a false report and violating my civil rights. He was trapped in the very system he had tried to weaponize against me. I watched the sweat bead on his upper lip, glistening in the red and blue strobe of the cruiser. This wasn't just instant regret. This was the moment his entire world flipped upside down. The silence on that highway was no longer empty. It was heavy with the weight of a career ending. The only sound was the rhythmic, mocking click of his cooling engine and the distant, uncaring hum of the city he thought he ruled. He stood there, frozen in the strobe light of his own cruiser, looking at my ID like it was a live grenade. The predatory energy that had filled the air just moments ago had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the cold, clinical reality of the law. I stood perfectly still, my arm extended, the gold seal of the district court still catching the blue and red flashes. I wanted him to feel the silence. In a courtroom, the most terrifying thing isn't when a judge shouts. It is when a judge stops talking and starts looking. I looked at him, really looked at him, until he had to turn his eyes away. "Your Honor," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. "I was just following protocol. We've had a string of thefts in this area. I saw the out-of county plates and the window tint, and I made a judgment call." "A judgment call?" I repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the night air. "Officer, I am the one who makes judgment calls. You make observations. And tonight, your observations were filtered through a lens of bias that I spend every single day trying to weed out of my courtroom. You didn't see a suspect. You saw a target. And you didn't see a crime. You saw an opportunity to flex a power you haven't earned." He began to reach for his radio, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He was looking for a lifeline. He wanted to call his sergeant, to find someone who could tell him this was all a big mistake. I took a step forward, and he actually took a step back. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that it felt like the earth had tilted. "Don't touch that radio," I said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command that carried the full authority of the state. "You wanted to play this by the book, officer, so let's talk about the book. Let's talk about the Fourth Amendment. Let's talk about the lack of articulable suspicion. Let's talk about the smell of marijuana that you suddenly can't seem to find. Where did it go? Did the wind blow the probable cause away the second you saw my title?" He didn't have an answer. He couldn't have one. He had built a house of cards out of lies, and I had just walked through the front door. He looked down at his boots, the same boots that had marched toward my car with such arrogance only minutes before. Now they were shuffling in the dirt. He looked small. Without the shield of his intimidation, he was just a man who had realized he was profoundly out of his league. "I have your badge number," I continued, my voice as cold as the steel of his handcuffs. "I have your name, and more importantly, I have the footage from my Dashcam, which recorded every word of your routine stop. I recorded you threatening to break my window. I recorded you reaching for your weapon because I asked for the law to be respected. I recorded the moment you decided that my life was less valuable than your ego." The instant regret wasn't just a look on his face, it was a physical transformation. He seemed to shrink inside his uniform. The Kevlar vest that made him look bulky and formidable now just looked like an oversized costume. He started to stammer an apology, a frantic stream of words meant to bridge the gap he had created. He told me he had a family. He told me he was a good cop who just had a bad night. He told me he was sorry. "You aren't sorry you did it," I said, cutting him off with a sharp wave of my hand. "You're sorry you did it to me. You're sorry that the person you chose to harass has the power to answer back. If I were a college student, or a mother working 2 jobs, or a young man who didn't know his rights, you wouldn't be apologizing. You'd be clicking those handcuffs and writing a report that would follow them for the rest of their lives. That is why this silence is so loud, officer, because you know I'm right." I watched as the reality of his situation finally settled in. He wasn't just worried about a reprimand, he was looking at the end of his path. In my county, word travels fast. A patrol officer who tries to bully a district judge doesn't just get a slap on the wrist. He becomes a liability. He becomes the reason every case he's ever touched gets scrutinized. He had become the very thing he claimed to be fighting, a threat to the system. I turned back toward my car, leaving him standing there in the dark. I didn't need to hear another word from him. The silence of his regret told me everything I needed to know. I got back into my SUV, buckled my seatbelt, and looked at him one last time through the glass. He was still standing there, his flashlight dimmed, the red and blue lights still spinning pointlessly into the night. He looked like a ghost. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving him alone on the shoulder of the highway with nothing but the truth for company. The drive from the highway to the precinct was the quietest 10 miles of my life. The adrenaline was still humming in my veins, a sharp, electric reminder of how close that encounter had come to a different kind of headline. I wasn't going home. I couldn't. If I went home and went asleep, I was accepting that what happened was just an isolated incident of bad luck for that officer. But as a judge, I know that isolated incidents are just patterns that haven't been documented yet. I pulled into the precinct parking lot. The fluorescent lights of the building felt sterile and cold. I walked through the double doors, still in my blazer, still holding that leather credential case in my hand like a shield. The desk sergeant looked up, a bored expression on his face that quickly shifted when he saw the look in my eyes. He didn't see a random driver. He saw the woman who presided over the 3 strikes hearings in Department 4. "Your Honor," he said, standing up a little straighter. "What are you doing here at 1 in the morning? Is everything okay?" "No, Sergeant, it isn't," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had that courtroom quiet, the kind of tone that makes everyone in the room stop typing and start listening. "One of your officers just attempted to manufacture a felony stop on the I-95. He threatened to break my window, he claimed to smell narcotics that don't exist, and he reached for his service weapon because I asked for a legal basis for his commands." The air in the room shifted. You could hear a pin drop. The sergeant's face went through a dozen different emotions in 3 seconds: confusion, realization, and finally, a deep, sinking dread. He knew exactly which units were patrolling that sector. He knew who the cowboys were. I want his dashcam footage pulled and flagged for evidence immediately, I continued. And I want his commanding officer on the phone, now. This was the tactical lecture. In court, I teach the law through rulings. Here, I was teaching it through accountability. I sat in that plastic chair in the lobby and waited. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want a quiet chat. I wanted the process to work the way it's supposed to work for everyone else. When the captain finally arrived, he tried to lead with the blue wall charm. He talked about the stress of the job, the late hours, and how Officer Miller was usually a stellar performer who must have just been on edge. I stopped him mid-sentence. "Captain, let's be very clear," I said, leaning forward. "This isn't about a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to sign a ticket. What I experienced was a calculated use of intimidation based on the assumption that I had no voice. If I didn't have this ID in my pocket, I'd be in a cell right now, or worse. You aren't sorry he did it. You're sorry he did it to a judge. And that is exactly why I am not leaving until a formal internal affairs investigation is opened." I spent the next 2 hours breaking down the legal violations one by one. I explained the lack of reasonable suspicion. I explained the violation of the Fourth Amendment. I explained how his behavior had just jeopardized every single active case he was involved in. If he lied to me on a recorded dashcam, his credibility as a witness was now zero. The captain's face got paler with every word. He realized I wasn't just complaining. I was building a case. I was dismantling the officer's career with the same precision I used to dismantle a faulty legal argument. I told them that the law is not a weapon for the powerful to use against the powerless. It is a fence meant to keep the powerful in check. "You have a choice," I told the captain as I stood up to leave. "You can handle this with the integrity this badge represents, or you can wait for the subpoena. Either way, the truth of what happened on that highway is coming out. I'm just giving you the chance to be on the right side of it." As I walked back to my car, the sun was just starting to peek over the horizon. The world was waking up, unaware of the battle that had just taken place. I knew the road ahead would be controversial. I knew people would say I used my status to get back at a cop. But I didn't use my status to get revenge. I used my status to ensure that for once, the system couldn't look the other way. The tactical lecture was over. Now it was time for the verdict. The fallout from that night didn't stay within the walls of the precinct. By the time Monday morning rolled around, the atmosphere in the courthouse had changed. Usually, when I walk through the halls, there is a respectful nod from the bailiffs and a quick good morning from the clerks. But that morning, the air was thick with a different kind of energy. The story of the highway judge had leaked. I sat in my chambers, staring at the stack of case files on my desk, but my mind was on the digital file currently sitting on a secure server in the Internal Affairs office. The summit wasn't just a meeting, it was a collision of two worlds. The police union had already sent over a representative. They weren't there to apologize. They were there to negotiate. The meeting took place in a small, windowless conference room on the 4th floor. On one side sat the union rep, a man named Henderson who looked like he had spent 30 years chewing on gravel, and a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. On the other side was the chief of police and myself. Henderson started with the hero narrative. He talked about how Officer Miller had a clean record, how he had 3 kids, and how he had been under immense pressure due to the recent rise in local crime. He suggested that my emotional reaction was blowing a routine misunderstanding out of proportion. He even had the audacity to suggest that I was the one who escalated the situation by not being immediately compliant. I let him finish. In my courtroom, I always let people dig their own graves before I provide the shovel. When the room went silent, I opened my laptop and turned it toward them. I didn't say a word. I just hit play on the raw footage I had secured. The room watched in high definition as Officer Miller approached my car with his hand on his holster. They heard the growl in his voice. They saw the moment he reached for the door handle without a shred of legal justification. And then they heard the lie, the clear, unmistakable claim that he smelled marijuana. "Henderson," I said, my voice cutting through the buzzing silence of the room like a cold wind. "You call this a misunderstanding. I call it perjury in progress. If Officer Miller had found a bag of flour in my backseat, he would have called it cocaine, and I'd be in a jumpsuit right now. The only reason we are sitting here talking about a misunderstanding is because he accidentally picked a fight with someone who signs his paycheck." The chief looked at the table. He knew. He had seen enough of these videos to know when a case was indefensible. The union rep tried to pivot, talking about retraining and a letter of reprimand. "No," I said, closing the laptop with a definitive thud. "A letter of reprimand is what you give a clerk who takes too long for lunch. This man weaponized the law. He used his state-issued authority to terrorize a citizen because of the color of her skin and the zip code she was driving through. If he stays on the force, every arrest he makes from this moment on is tainted. Every person he puts in handcuffs will have a ready-made defense based on his documented lack of integrity." The controversy was starting to boil outside the room. Local news had picked up the story, and the narrative was splitting. Half the city saw me as a hero standing up to a bully, while the other half, the loud, anonymous half on the internet, claimed I was anti-police and abusing my power. They called me a political activist in a robe. I didn't care. The summit wasn't about my popularity, it was about the standard. I looked at the chief and gave him the ultimatum. "You can fire him today and send a message that this department has zero tolerance for profiling and perjury, or you can defend him and let me take this to the state licensing board. I will testify. I will release the footage. And I will make sure the entire state knows that the police department thinks the Fourth Amendment is optional." The union lawyer leaned over and whispered in Henderson's ear. The color drained from Henderson's face. They realized I wasn't looking for an apology or a settlement. I was looking for a removal. I was at the summit of my career, and I was using that height to make sure the view was clear for everyone behind me. By the end of the hour, the negotiation was over. There was no deal. There was only the inevitable. Officer Miller wasn't just losing his patrol, he was losing his badge. But the true summit wasn't his termination. It was the moment I realized that for the first time in a long time, the scale had actually tipped back toward balance. I walked out of that room and back to my bench, not as a victim of a stop, but as a protector of the process. The aftermath of that night didn't just fade into the archives of the precinct. It became a landmark, a moment where the invisible lines of power in the United States were redrawn. I didn't set out to be a symbol. I just wanted to get home without being harassed. But as the news of Officer Miller's termination hit the headlines, I realized that my story was the key that unlocked 1,000 other silent struggles. The controversy didn't go away, it grew. but so did the resolve of the community. The legacy of that highway encounter began to take shape in my own courtroom. I started seeing a change in the way officers testified. They were more careful with their words, more precise with their probable cause. They knew that the woman sitting on the bench didn't just read the law, she had lived through its violation. I wasn't anti-police, I was pro-accountability. I made it my mission to ensure that the badge remained a symbol of service, not a license for a power trip. I started a mentorship program for young lawyers and law enforcement recruits. I wanted them to sit in the same room and look each other in the eye. I wanted the recruits to understand that every time they pull someone over, they are holding a life in their hands. And I wanted the young lawyers to know that the law is a living thing, something you have to fight for every single day. We held town halls where the community could speak their truth without fear. For the first time, the people in my zip code felt like the bench was looking out for them, not just looking down on them. The internet trolls eventually found a new target, but the impact remained. I received letters from all over the country, mothers who feared for their sons, students who had been intimidated into silence, and even other officers who were tired of the bad apples spoiling the reputation of the whole harvest. They thanked me for not just driving away. They thanked me for staying on that shoulder of the highway and demanding more from a system that often gives so little. My legacy isn't the title of judge or the fancy SUV. It's the fact that in this corner of the world, the statistical impossibility became a reality. I showed that you can come from the sirens and the shadows and still be the one who brings the light. I showed that when the system tries to break you, you can use those broken pieces to build something stronger. Years from now, when I'm no longer wearing this robe, I want people to remember that justice isn't something that just happens in a building with marble pillars. It happens at 11:42 p.m. on a dark highway. It happens when a citizen refuses to be a victim. It happens when power meets its match and has to blink. I didn't just survive that night, I reclaimed it. And in doing so, I gave a piece of that power back to every person who has ever been told to just stay quiet. In the United States, we are told that justice is blind, but we know better. Justice has eyes, and it is watching what we do when we think no one is looking. If this story moved you, if it made you realize that your voice carries more weight than you think, then don't let it end here. The only way to keep the system honest is to stay loud. Drop a justice in the comments if you believe no one is above the law. Smash that like button to help this story reach the people who need to hear it most. And if you haven't already, subscribe to join a community that isn't afraid to pull back the curtain on the truth. We aren't just watching history, we are writing it. What would you have done if you were in my car that night? I want to hear your thoughts below.